The night before my retirement trip, my grandson called me out of nowhere and said, "Grandpa, hide a camera in the living room and get out of the apartment tonight. Do not go back." I was a 60-year-old engineer. I had built things my entire life. I trusted the foundation beneath me without ever thinking to check it. So I did exactly what he told me. And what I watched on that screen the following morning made me understand that the person I had trusted above all others had been quietly tearing apart everything I'd spent 35 years constructing. Welcome back to Calm Family Revenge, a place where real family stories are told with honesty and care. If this kind of storytelling speaks to you, stay close and follow along so you never miss what comes next. Before we begin, I'd love to know, when you sit down with a story like this one, what are you hoping to walk away with: comfort, clarity, or something else entirely? A quick note: this story contains fictional elements woven in for storytelling purposes, and any resemblance to real people or events is purely coincidental. What matters most is the message at the heart of it. There was a time I believed a man's life could be read in what he constructed. Not tensile ratings or load-bearing specs, not the thousands of calculations I'd tallied across 35 years as a structural engineer. I'm talking about the things that never appear on any blueprint. The marriage built to endure. The home meant to be a refuge. The retirement that was supposed to feel like reaching solid ground, not like teetering at a precipice, bewildered about how you ended up there. My name is Walter Greer, 60 years old, and until roughly 3 months ago, I counted myself among the fortunate. Indianapolis, Indiana raised me a city that keeps its demands reasonable provided you show up and put in the work. My father's trade was concrete. His father drove spikes on the railroad before him. In our household, hard work wasn't some guiding principle we discussed. It was simply what we did, same as breathing. By 22, I had my engineering degree from Indiana University and a berth at Harwell and Cole Construction that would define my professional life in one capacity or another until the day I retired. Nadine came into my life at a company picnic, summer of 1997. She had on a white sundress, laughing at something one of my colleagues had just said, and I remember the thought arriving clean and certain I had never encountered a laugh quite like that one, open, unself-conscious, the sort that made you want to earn another. We were husband and wife inside 2 years. Together we purchased a 2-bedroom condo on the north side of Indianapolis, on a quiet street lined with maple trees that turned spectacular shades of amber every October. The mortgage ran 20 years. I still remember the heft of the pen, the look of my name on that last page, deliberate, permanent, the signature of a man who intended to see it through. Last February, we sent the final payment. I came to the kitchen table that day, with the bank's payoff letter, one sheet of paper, declaring the place entirely and unconditionally ours, no lender's name attached. I poured myself a coffee, smoothed the letter out in front of me, and sat with it. 35 years of before dawn starts, and nights that ran long weekends spent on sites in Lafayette and Terre Haute, and one particularly punishing February in Nashville, where the cold arrived like a sentence, and this was what it had all amounted to. 4 walls, a roof, no one else's name on the deed. Nadine looked up from her phone at the counter and offered a smile. "That's wonderful, Walter," she said, and turned back to the screen. I let that be enough. People carry joy in different ways. Nadine wasn't one for grand reactions. She was measured, capable, the kind of woman who ran our finances with the same quiet efficiency she applied to everything. I had leaned on that for years. After a full day of construction numbers, I had no appetite for household accounts in the evening. Nadine managed it all: cards, utilities, premiums, the transfers into our retirement savings. My trust in her was absolute. I want to say that plainly. It was the trust you extend to a building's foundation. You don't go down and probe it each morning. You proceed on the reasonable assumption that it holds. The evening in question was a Tuesday toward the end of May. That particular season in Indiana, when warmth finally arrives without conditions, windows pushed open, the neighbors' children audible on the sidewalk below. I'd driven back from a job in Fishers where a commercial renovation was in its final stretch, and my back carried the full weight of the day. I showered, warmed the leftover beef stew Nadine had made 2 nights before, and took my place at the kitchen table with a glass of water and the hush of the apartment around me. Nadine stepped into the hallway around 6:30, deep navy blazer over dark tailored slacks, hair pinned in the style she reserved for going out. She had her leather purse, the good one, not the canvas bag she grabbed for errands. "Charity board meeting tonight," she said, directing her gaze somewhere past me. "I mentioned last week it might go long." "Sure," I said. "Drive safe." She stopped at the door, and instinct pulled my eyes from my plate. She was smiling at me, the composed, unhurried smile of a woman who has been someone's wife for 25 years. Surface perfect, unremarkable. Except that her eyes held nothing. I had watched Nadine smile across 10,000 ordinary moments. I knew what the genuine article looked like, the fine lines gathering at the outer corners, her face loosening into something unguarded. What she was offering now was different, practiced, sealed at the surface, empty below it. The door clicked shut. I sat there, fork suspended, tracking the rhythm of her heels down the corridor to the elevator until the sound disappeared. The beef stew cooled on the plate untouched. I stayed in that kitchen a long while, no book, no television, only a low, uncomfortable feeling I could not name. The sensation was familiar from job sites, a structure that looked sound on every drawing, but transmitted something wrong through the soles of your boots when you walked it. A frequency the instruments hadn't registered. Call it an engineer's read on a failing system, or call it an old man's unease that had finally gotten too loud to ignore. I rinsed the dish, switched off the kitchen light, drifted to the window and looked down at the street, where the maple trees were leafing into their full summer shape. My phone moved on the counter. I assumed it was the Fishers foreman following up on something from the site. It was Cody. "Grandpa, are you home alone tonight? I need to talk to you, not over the phone." I went through it 3 times. Not from confusion, 11 words, each one plain, the kind of directness Cody had always had. But their arrangement produced something that pressed against my sternum in a way I couldn't account for right away. "I need to talk to you, not over the phone." Cody was 19, Kevin's son, my boy's boy, and he was not someone who reached for effect. Drama simply wasn't in his character. He was one of those quietly sharp people whose silence has weight to it, the kind that accumulates from thinking hard before speaking. When Cody did say something, you paid attention because he'd already rotated the problem through several positions before he opened his mouth. I replied, "Front door's unlocked. Come whenever." 20 minutes later, I heard the elevator. Then his knock, 2 short raps, same as always. I pulled the door open, and there he stood, tall and lean, a gray Indiana University hoodie, his dark hair slightly damp from a recent shower. Slung over one shoulder was his beat-up navy blue backpack he took everywhere. His jaw had a set to it that put years on his face. "Hey, Grandpa." He came in and swept the apartment with a glance, the reflex of someone confirming the room is clear. "She's at a meeting," I told him. "Back late." Something shifted in his shoulders at that, a fraction of release, like he'd been bracing all the way over. That small give said more than his words had. "Sit down," I said. "Can I get you coffee?" "No, sir." He parked his backpack on a chair and remained standing, working the back of his neck with one hand. "I've been trying to figure out how to say this for about 3 weeks now. I kept telling myself maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was reading too much into it." "Cody." My voice stayed level. "Just say it." He drew out a chair and sat across from me, arms on the table, fingers laced. He met my eyes the way Kevin had raised him to do when the subject was serious. "About 3 weeks ago," he said, "I was at Keystone Fashion Mall with a couple of friends. We were just walking around, nothing serious, and I saw Grandma Nadine coming out of the watch store, the one near the Nordstrom entrance." I held quiet. She was carrying one of those dark gift bags. Cody went on, his voice careful and measured. "You know the kind, the ones they use when you've bought something that comes in a box. Something held me back from calling her name. Can't tell you exactly what, instinct maybe." He drew a breath. She headed out to the second-level parking deck. I trailed behind, keeping about 30 feet of distance. She had no idea I was there. The silence in the kitchen felt heavy. "A car was sitting there waiting for her," Cody said. "Silver BMW 5 Series, maybe 2 or 3 years old, well-maintained. Guy behind the wheel." She went straight to the passenger side, reached through the window, and passed him the bag. Right there in the car, he pulled out the box, lifted the lid, and slid the watch onto his wrist. Cody's jaw went rigid. Then she leaned in and kissed him. I didn't move an inch. The refrigerator was humming somewhere behind me. A television murmured through the wall from next door. The kitchen light had that quality where everything looks too hard-edged, too close. "How old was he?" I asked. The words came out softer than I'd planned. "Somewhere around mid-30s, Cody said. Sharp dresser hair pulled back neat, the type who invests in looking like money." He let out a long breath. "I'm sorry, Grandpa." I stood at that table for what must have been 2 solid minutes, working hard to convince myself there was another explanation. There wasn't. My eyes dropped to my own hands resting on the tabletop. Thick knuckles, skin gone a little slack the way it does by the time you're 60. These hands had built things. I'd devoted every working year to funding this home, this marriage, the future the two of us were meant to share. "You said you've been carrying this for 3 weeks, I said. "Yes, sir." The weight behind Cody's voice was heavier than any 19-year-old should have to bear. After what I saw that day, I kept my eyes open. She started going out with more frequency, changing up the nights, changing up the reasons. And then I started digging into a few other things. He stopped. "Grandpa, remember last year when you let me into the household email account? You were trying to get the new router working, and the password wasn't coming to you. I still had it. So I went back through the statements that were sitting in that inbox," Cody said. "Account alerts, credit card digests." He held my gaze. The numbers were off. Transfers and charges that didn't add up, not small amounts either, and they went back further than a few weeks. The refrigerator kept humming. A car rolled past on the street outside. 20 years ago, I'd handed Nadine full control of our finances without giving it a second thought. She had a sharp eye for detail, a natural feel for numbers that she never fully credited herself with. Bills paid every month, accounts, tidy retirement contributions arriving like clockwork. That was what I'd always assumed. That was what I'd always been told. I had never once pulled up the statements and checked for myself. Too worn out at the end of the day, too certain the ground under us was firm, too content to trust without verifying. "How bad is it?" I asked. Cody reached into his backpack and produced a folder. He placed it on the table between us and left it shut. Palm flat on the cover. "There's more in here you need to see," he said. "But Grandpa, before we get into it, I'm asking you for something. Give me your word that you won't make any moves tonight, not until we've gone through all of it. Because if you charge in there half-knowing and furious, she'll destroy the trail and we'll never get the chance to do this properly." I looked across the table at my grandson, at the calm holding his face together and the grief sitting just beneath it. The quiet devastation of a young man who had been living with something terrible for 3 weeks. because he was trying to keep me from being blindsided alone. "I promise," I said. He opened the folder. 30 pages, maybe. Cody had run everything off the printer and sorted it into sections, each one tagged with a small handwritten sticky note exactly the way his father used to organize things before tackling anything serious. I knew that habit the moment I saw it. Kevin had always been methodical that way. Some things carry forward. "I'm going to take you through it chronologically," Cody said. "Earliest first moving up to the present. You'll be able to watch the pattern develop." I nodded, both hands flat on the table. I was concentrating on keeping them there, keeping them still. The first section was a stack of notifications from our joint checking account. Cody had gone through and highlighted lines in yellow. Transfers going out to an outside account, same routing number over and over, anywhere from $800 to $2,200, at a stretch every 3 to 4 weeks for the past 11 months. "That outside account," Cody said, pressing a finger to the page. "No utility company, no insurer, nothing I could tie to a single legitimate household expense. I checked every payee against your known regular bills. This one came up empty every time." I stared at those yellow marks. 11 months. All the while I'd been out driving to job sites in Fishers and Lafayette and Zionsville, grinding through structural load calculations, fighting with subcontractors who couldn't hold a schedule the whole time. Money had been bleeding out of the account I'd spent 35 years building. "What does it come to?" I asked. Cody flipped to the last page of that section. In red pen at the bottom, circled twice, was the total. $19,400. That figure landed on the table between us with a kind of mass to it, like a stone breaking the surface of still water. I pulled a slow breath in through my nose. Engineer's reflex. You work in facts. You work in numbers. I told myself to handle this exactly the way I'd handle a report on a structural failure. Define the problem. Measure what was lost. Trace it back to its source. "Go on," I said. The second section covered the credit cards. Nadine carried 2 cards under her name on our joint account, the main one, and a second she had described to me years back as something she kept for real emergencies. Cody had gathered the digest notifications from the shared inbox. He walked me through a cluster of charges that broke from the ordinary pattern of groceries and prescriptions. Restaurants I'd never set foot in, never even heard of. A monthly charge to a downtown parking facility I had no memory of authorizing. 2 transactions from a high-end car rental outfit, adding up to just over $3,000 across 4 months. "She told you she was taking her own car to those charity functions." Cody set his voice low. Not a question. "She did," I said. "She rented a car 11 times in the past 8 months. Cody kept his voice, even though the tightness in his jaw gave him away. "Different vehicle every time." I looked the company up. They deal exclusively in premium cars, Mercedes, BMW, that range. I pictured Nadine in her deep navy blazer, her good leather bag over one arm, calling out that she'd be back late. I thought about every time I'd said be careful without it occurring to me to wonder what she was driving. The third section was what made the edges of my vision go soft. Cody had found a document in the drafts folder of the shared email account never sent, just sitting there. It was a property transfer form, the type used in Marion County to begin adding or removing a name from a real estate deed. Our home address across the top. My name and Nadine's listed as current owners. And in the line where a new joint owner's name would go, typed in clean 12-point font, was a name I had never encountered. Brennan Ashford. "Who is that?" My voice came out with an edge I hadn't intended. "The man from the parking deck," Cody said. "The one she gave the watch to." I tracked the name to a LinkedIn profile that fit what I'd seen. Marketing mid-30s keeps an apartment over in the Broad Ripple neighborhood. Cody paused. Grandpa, I believe this form was being put together to add his name to your deed, the deed on your fully paid-off condo. The condo I had chipped away at for 20 years. The condo where I had sat at this very table just 3 months ago, holding the payoff letter, letting myself feel for once, like a man who had actually gotten somewhere after all the years of grinding. My throat closed around itself. She hasn't submitted it, Cody said quickly. I pulled up the Marion County Recorder's office site and checked. Nothing has been filed, but the document is real, and given everything else laid out in front of us, I seriously doubt she drew it up out of idle curiosity. I pushed my chair back and got to my feet, not to go anywhere, just to feel the floor under me, to feel my own weight pressing down in a room that seemed to be shifting off its axis. Grandpa, Cody said carefully, I know exactly what's running through your head right now. I understand it, but if you pick up that phone or walk in there tonight, she'll realize we've been looking. And then she'll act fast. She'll find a way to push that transfer through, or she'll empty out whatever's left before we can get ahead of it. We have to be smarter. I got up and went to the kitchen window, staring down at the darkened street. The maple trees were just shapes now, silhouettes cut against the amber wash of the streetlights. I had put one of those trees in the ground myself 22 years ago, an Arbor Day weekend when the city was handing out free saplings, and I'd talked Nadine into coming outside with a shovel and a 5-gallon bucket. She'd laughed that day. A real one, the kind that got all the way up into her eyes. I turned back toward my grandson. So what do we do? I asked. Cody sat up straighter in his chair. Something moved across his face. The grief hadn't gone anywhere, but something else was underneath it now, something firmer, something that looked like resolve. There's still more you need to see, he said. Then we figure out the next move. He reached back into the folder and drew out a single printed sheet. A travel confirmation email, 2 names across the top. Walter Vance and Nadine Vance. Flying out of Indianapolis International Airport to Istanbul, Turkey, with a connection through Newark. 7 nights at a 5-star hotel on the Bosphorus. Total $4,860. Charged to the card ending in the 4 digits I recognized as Nadine's backup emergency card. I had seen this email before. Nadine had forwarded it to me 6 weeks ago with a short note attached. Surprise, sweetheart. Merry early retirement. I booked us something special. I'd read it standing in the parking lot of the Fisher's job site with my hard hat still on, and something warm had moved through me, a feeling I hadn't had in a while. The sense that she still thought about us, that there was something between us still worth tending. I'd thanked her that night over dinner. She'd smiled and reached across the table and rested her hand on mine, and told me she wanted us to have something ahead of us worth looking forward to. When was this charged? I asked Cody, though somewhere inside I already knew what he'd say. He pointed to the date in the corner of the page. Then he laid a second document next to it. A bank notification, a large transfer out of our joint savings. Same date. 4 days after that transfer cleared, the travel charge showed up on the credit card statement. She moved money from savings into checking to pay down that month's card balance, Cody said. On the surface, the credit card statement looked fine. The savings account alert came through a separate email, probably got buried. I only caught it because I was specifically hunting for this kind of pattern. I sat back down in my chair. That cheerful confirmation email spread out on the table in front of me. The airline header, the hotel name in elegant script, a 5-star property with a view of the Bosphorus. The kind of trip I had never managed to give Nadine because there had always been something, a mortgage installment, a car repair, a reason to hold off until things settled. She had booked it using money she had already taken from me and handed it to me as a gift. Hi, she needed to buy herself time, Cody said. His tone wasn't harsh, just level. Looking at the timeline of everything I found, the property transfer draft was put together right around this same period. My read is she was close, almost ready to complete the deed transfer, but she needed you relaxed and not paying attention for a few more weeks. A romantic trip to Turkey was a clean way to make that happen. I pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of my nose. The headache that had been gathering since Cody knocked on my door was now parked directly behind my eyes, with no intention of leaving. She used money from my retirement, I said, to pay for a vacation, to keep me from noticing she was taking my retirement. Yes, sir, Cody said. That's exactly what she did. There was something almost architectural about it. I thought, in the distant way you think about things, when the closer ones are too big to look at directly. The way a building with serious hidden damage could hold its shape for years. Everything on the exterior sealed and painted and presentable, every visible seam neat, while the load-bearing structure underneath was quietly giving way. It didn't announce itself. It waited. And then one day something shifted, and it all came down at once. I had built a career finding those hidden failures before they turned into catastrophes. Thousands of hours on job sites, eyes trained to catch what was wrong inside what looked right. And here in my own home, inside my own marriage, I had not caught a single thing. Cody, I said, how long have you been sitting on all of this? He looked at the table for a second before answering. 3 weeks since the parking deck. But I needed to be certain before I brought it to you. I didn't want to hand you something I hadn't finished building. He paused. I kept trying to find another explanation. I went back through 6 months of statements, then 8, then 11. Every time I thought maybe I'd gotten it wrong, I found something else that locked it in. 3 weeks. My 19-year-old grandson had spent 3 weeks holding this alone, poring over financial records in his dorm room or at his parents' kitchen table, trying to work out how to tell his grandfather that the woman he had been married to for 25 years was methodically taking apart everything he had ever built. Does your father know? I asked. No, Cody said. I came to you first. This is your life, Grandpa. You should hear it before anyone else does. I looked at him across the table. Really looked. The dark rings under his eyes that I hadn't registered when he first walked in. The specific worn-out quality of someone who hadn't been sleeping right for weeks. He had taken all of this on himself. Quietly, carefully, systematically, the way he did everything. He had protected me the only way he knew how, which was to make sure the truth was in my hands, before anyone could use my ignorance as a weapon against me. The tightness in my throat had nothing to do with anger. There's one more thing, Cody said. He lifted the last document from the folder. And this is the worst one. He set it on the table and pressed it flat with his palm. It was a photograph printed on standard copy paper, a little grainy the way screenshots always come out. A still frame from the security camera in our building's parking garage. The timestamp read 2 weeks back, a Tuesday afternoon, the day I'd been out on a site in Lafayette. A man was moving through the garage toward the elevator bank that served our floor. Tall, well-put-together dark hair slicked back. Empty hands. He walked with the easy, unhurried certainty of someone who had been somewhere before and expected to be welcome. He came into the building, I said. He went up to your floor, Cody said. I pulled the timestamp from the footage and matched it against the key fob entry log for your unit. Grandpa, someone used a key to get into your apartment that afternoon. Your spare key. The room went very quiet. He was inside my home, I said. Those words sat in my chest like a shard of broken rebar. He was inside my home. I had spent a career understanding at a level most people never have reason to consider what it means for a structure to be violated. A load-bearing wall opened up carelessly. A foundation bored into without a proper survey first. The damage doesn't always reveal itself right away. Sometimes weeks pass months before the settling starts, before the hairline cracks show up in the plaster and the doors begin to hang wrong in their frames, and you finally understand that something at the core has been undone. I pushed back from the table and moved into the living room because I needed to be in motion, or I was going to drive my fist into the kitchen wall, and I had just enough of my engineer's mind still running to understand that would get me nothing but a trip to urgent care and a drywall bill. Cody followed as far as the doorway and stood there watching me, giving me the space to move without losing sight of me. "Tell me what he was in there looking for," I said. "The building cameras had him on your floor for 41 minutes, Cody said. "I can't say for certain what he did once he was inside the unit. The cameras only cover the common areas, but based on the property transfer document I pulled from the email drafts, I think he was searching for the original deed to the condo. In Indiana, when a mortgage gets paid off, the lender releases the lien and the deed gets recorded with the county. The physical document, the actual paper with the official county recorder's stamp on it, gets mailed out to the homeowner. I knew exactly where mine was. It lived in the small fireproof lockbox on the bedroom closet shelf, alongside our social security cards, birth certificates, and the savings bonds my mother had pressed into my hands when I turned 30. Nadine had always known about that lockbox. 20 years she'd known. She handed him the spare key, I said, not a question. "That's where the evidence points," Cody said. "The key fob system logs every entry and exit. Your unit was accessed at 2:14 on a Tuesday afternoon. You were out in Lafayette. Nadine's car wasn't in the building garage that day. I pulled the parking log. Someone used a key." I stood in the middle of my own living room and took in the space around me the way you stop seeing a room you've lived in too long. The couch Nadine had chosen. The side table I'd put together on a Saturday morning 8 years ago while she sat with the newspaper and passed me screws. The framed photo on the wall from our 20th anniversary, the two of us up in Gatlinburg, squinting into the sun with the Smoky Mountains stretched out behind us, both of us grinning. I had been happy in that picture, genuinely, simply happy. I still remembered that morning, the air carrying pine and wood smoke, Nadine slipping her hand into the crook of my arm on the trail, leaning her head briefly against my shoulder. Had any of it meant what I'd believed it meant? Or had I been the only one who meant it at all? "Grandpa." Cody's voice cut across the spiral. "Stay with me. We're not finished." I turned toward him. My jaw ached from holding it tight. "There's one more thing I found," he said. I almost missed it. It was buried inside a subfolder of the email drafts labeled Research Grant Application. He went back to the kitchen and returned with the last pages from the folder. He held them out, and I took them, though my hands weren't perfectly steady. 2 pages. The header read, "Marion County Arts and Community Foundation Grant Application." And at a quick glance, it looked exactly like what it claimed to be a funding request for some kind of community research initiative. Dense paragraphs, official-looking, formatting the sort of document you'd move past without a second look if someone slipped it into a stack of papers in front of you. But there on the second page, tucked into the signature block at the bottom, was my name, Walter Harold Greer. Beside it, a signature line. "This is not a grant application," Cody said quietly. He read the second paragraph on the first page, the operative language. I read it. Then I read it a second time. Beneath that harmless-sounding heading about community research sat legal transfer language, specific, precise, the kind you couldn't mistake if you knew what you were looking at. It authorized the transfer of intellectual property rights and co-ownership interest in any real property held jointly by the undersigned To Brennan Ashford, effective upon notarization. A property rights transfer document dressed in the skin of a grant application. She was going to get me to sign this, I said. I think she may have already tried, Cody said. Look at the bottom of page 2. I turned the page. There was a faint ghost on the paper, the impression of a signature, as if someone had signed another document, resting on top of this one, and the pressure of the pen had bled through. Not crisp enough to hold up as legally valid, but unmistakably there. My own handwriting, my own name, transferred onto a document I had never knowingly put a pen to. I think she slipped this underneath something else she asked you to sign, Cody said. A few months back, probably. The impression didn't come through clean enough to use, so she held onto the document and waited for another chance. The broken rebar feeling in my chest took a sharper turn. Cody, I said. My voice came out very quiet. I want to drive over there right now, and I want to— I know, he said firmly. And that is exactly what she is counting on. Grandpa, please sit down. What I'm about to lay out is going to sound too measured, given what you're feeling right now. But it is the only path that actually ends in our favor. I stood there a moment longer, breathing hard through my nose, the forged document in my hands. Then I sat. Go ahead, I said. Cody sat back down across from me and folded his hands on the table. For a moment, he looked less like a college student of 19 and more like a man who had spent years working through hard problems in hard rooms. I recognized the posture. I had carried it myself across the table from clients and contractors when I needed someone to trust me with something that mattered. Here's what I think we need to do, he said. Hear all of it before you respond. I nodded. Financial records and security camera stills are not enough on their own, Cody said. Documents can be challenged. A capable attorney can argue the transfers were authorized, that the property form was just a draft that went nowhere, that the key fob log proves nothing conclusive. Nadine is sharp, Grandpa. If we walk into a lawyer's office or a police station with what we have now, she will have an account ready for every piece of it. He was right. I knew he was right. I had been around enough contract disputes in my career to understand how paper evidence bends in the hands of someone determined to bend it. A pile of documents is only as strong as the narrative you can wrap around them. What we actually need, Cody went on, is something that can't be explained away, something that puts intent and action in the same frame at the same time, with nowhere to go. You want to catch her in the act, I said. Yes, sir. He reached into his backpack and produced a small cardboard box I hadn't noticed sitting there. He pushed it across the table to me. Inside, cushioned in bubble wrap, was a compact wireless camera roughly the size of a golf ball, matte black, with a wide-angle lens no bigger than a shirt button. It pairs with an app on your phone. Motion-activated night vision capable live feed and cloud recording running at the same time. I bought it 3 weeks ago, right when the pieces started coming together. I lifted it out and turned it over in my fingers. Lighter than I'd expected. I've been tracking Nadine's pattern, Cody said. Tuesdays and Thursdays she goes out. She's told you charity meetings, book club, a dance fitness class. Based on where the building entry logs place her and the credit card charges at restaurants over in Broad Ripple, I think those evenings have been spent with Brennan. He paused. But she hasn't brought him here, not while you were home anyway. She left tonight at 6:30. You said she'd be back late. That's what she told me. I think tonight or very soon she'll bring him back here. Cody's voice was level. She's close to finishing the transfer. The document exists. All she needs is your signature, or something close enough to pass for it. I believe she's going to make her move soon, and I think she'll bring Brennan here to wrap things up when she's certain the apartment is empty and she has enough time. I set the camera down between us. You want me to position this inside the apartment, I said, and then clear out. Exactly. Tonight, once we finish talking, I want you to go back in, find a spot out of sight with a clear view of the living room and the front door, and set the camera. Then you come to my parents' house and stay there. He held my gaze. Whatever that camera picks up tonight is yours, Grandpa. This is your home, your property. Recording inside your own residence is fully legal in Indiana, even without the other person's knowledge, so long as you are the property owner and at least one party to any conversation consents to the recording. You're that party. I sat with that. I hadn't known the precise legal standard, but it tracked. Indiana operated under a one-party consent rule for recordings made on private property. Cody had done the homework. What if she doesn't come back tonight? I asked. Then we wait, Cody said plainly. The camera stays where it is. You stay at my parents' place for however long it takes. We tell Nadine you got called out of town for an emergency site inspection if she asks. I looked at the small black camera sitting on the table. Beyond the window, the Indianapolis night was quiet and unremarkable. 22 years of staring at that same stretch of pavement. The oak I had put in the ground myself was nothing more than a dark mass against the orange-yellow bleed of the streetlights. Nadine's smile kept surfacing in my mind, that rehearsed vacant thing she had aimed at me on her way out the door. Then Brennan's ghost signature pressed into paperwork I had never so much as laid eyes on. Then the number 41 minutes. A stranger inside my home for 41 minutes, walking those rooms I had bought, with 35 years of labor searching for the single document that would hand him everything I had built. What settled into my chest wasn't anger. It wasn't grief either. It was something closer to the sensation I used to get at the end of a long structural investigation. That quiet, almost clinical moment when the failure point finally reveals itself and the path forward becomes obvious. A cold kind of clarity. There's a ficus in the living room corner, I said. The tall one right beside the window. The growth near the base is thick enough that you can't see down into it from the other side of the room. Cody held my gaze without blinking. That'll work. I got to my feet and picked up the camera. Give me 10 minutes, then I'll meet you over at your parents'. Cody rose too, and we stood there for a beat without speaking because the moment had already said the only things worth saying. He reached over and put his hand on my shoulder for just a second, the gesture his father used sometimes, the silent shorthand men in our family had always relied on when words turned useless. Then I walked back through my apartment door for what I didn't yet know was the last time I'd crossed that threshold, still trusting my marriage. The ficus occupied the corner near the window, wide-leafed and utterly unmoved by what was happening around it, the way every plant is indifferent to human wreckage. I got down on one knee, eased the lower branches apart, and worked the camera into the space where the trunk split, tilting the lens so it covered the entryway and the room behind it. I opened the app. The image came back immediately, crisp, full coverage. The couch, the side table, the anniversary photo hanging on the wall, all of it visible. I straightened up, let my eyes travel the room one last time and left. Door locked behind me. Kevin's place was 14 minutes away. I know the exact number because I kept my eyes on the dashboard clock for every one of those minutes, not out of impatience, but because I needed an anchor, something fixed and honest to hold on to. Numbers, distance, time. None of those things forge signatures or wear a warm expression while everything behind the eyes has gone dead. 14 minutes, 8.3 miles, 35 years of a man's life quietly pulled apart over 11 months by the person he'd trusted without question. Kevin had settled in Carmel, a subdued suburb sitting north of Indianapolis, in a two-story colonial he and Tamara had purchased 6 years back when Cody was finishing up high school. A well-kept house, sturdy, the kind where the gutters got cleaned every fall and the driveway got sealed every 3 years. That habit, tending to things, keeping them sound, my son had come by it honestly. I'd always taken quiet satisfaction in that. The porch light was burning when I turned into the drive. Cody had phoned ahead. Kevin was already pulling the front door open before my foot hit the top step. 41 years old, wide through the shoulders, the same as me, and carrying the same wiring, the kind that goes still and inward when something is seriously wrong instead of reaching for noise to fill the gap. He read my face in one glance and moved aside without a syllable, holding the door back, the way you do when someone is walking in, with a weight you can see but not touch. "Cody filled me in," he said after I stepped past him. "You don't owe me an explanation tonight." "I'm fine," I told him, not quite accurate, but the closest thing to true I could produce. Tamara came out of the kitchen carrying a mug of coffee she put directly into my hands, no question asked. That was her way. 20 years as a nurse had calibrated her to the particular stillness of a person in shock who hasn't caught up to the fact yet. The coffee was hot and strong, and I stood in my son's front hallway, with both palms wrapped around that mug, feeling the full weight of 60 years in my bones. We moved to the living room, Kevin and Tamara on the sofa, Cody in the armchair, with his laptop balanced on his knees, me in the wide chair beside the window that faced the dark front yard. Cody had the feed pulled up my apartment. The living room lamp throwing its low, familiar light, the anniversary photo on the wall, the ficus standing in the corner holding its secret. The place looked completely undisturbed. It looked the way it always looked on a Tuesday night when Nadine was out, and I was supposedly home. Except Nadine had no idea I wasn't there. Conversation didn't amount to much. Tamara topped off my coffee at some point. Kevin perched on the edge of the sofa with his arms across his knees, eyes on the floor, the posture he takes when he's working something through in his head. Cody kept his attention on the screen patient in the way of someone who has already moved through the emotional part of the night and is now just waiting for the record to catch up to what he knows. Around 9 o'clock, a text from Nadine landed on my phone. "Still at the meeting, running late. Don't wait up." I held the phone and read it twice. The sheer offhand intimacy of it, a smooth, practiced untruth, slipped into our thread the way you drop a stone into still water. No hesitation in it whatsoever. Don't wait up. The tone of a woman whose only problem is a long agenda and a late hour. As if the entirety of this night was just a charity board meeting running over schedule. I typed back, "No problem. Drive safe," words I'd sent her 100 times before. She'd noticed nothing off in them. That was exactly the idea. Kevin's head came up when my screen lit. "Nadine." "Yes," I said. He gave a slow nod and went back to studying the floor. Cody looked up briefly from the laptop. "My guess she makes her move within the next hour or two. She'll want to walk through that door before midnight. Can't have anything looking unusual." I turned my phone over and set it face down on the chair arm. Outside, the Carmel street had gone quiet. Somebody's sprinkler ticking through its cycle in the dark. A dog down the block letting out 2 barks, then silence. The ordinary texture of a Tuesday night in an ordinary neighborhood, the exact sounds I had drifted off beside for 30 years, never once stopping to reckon with how much I was simply assuming would always be there. My mind went to the lockbox from the bedroom closet. Earlier that evening, before I'd positioned the camera, I had pulled the deed and the other critical papers out and moved them to my briefcase, which was sitting in my trunk. A modest precaution one Cody had proposed. yet the act had carried weight. Reclaiming the one document that stood for all of it, time dragged. Kevin poured a glass of water and stood in the kitchen doorway drinking it. Tamara turned in around 10 o'clock, pressed her hand briefly to my shoulder as she passed, and said she'd leave the light on in the guest room. Cody stayed locked on his screen, the blue-white glow of it lighting his face from below, holding his watch with the disciplined calm of someone who knows that certain things can only be resolved by staying put and letting them arrive. At 11:47, Cody went rigid in his chair. "Grandpa," he kept his voice low. I was already moving before he got the whole word out. On his screen, the front door of my apartment was swinging inward. Cody turned the laptop in my direction without comment. Sharp image, the night vision pulling every detail out of the dark. Nadine came through first, still wearing the deep navy blazer over dark tailored slacks she'd had on when she walked out 6 hours earlier, her leather purse hanging from one shoulder. Her movements were easy, unhurried, the fluency of someone returning to familiar ground. After a long night, one hand reaching back without looking to push the door open further. Brennan Ashford came in right behind her. A still from a parking garage was all I'd had until now. Motion was a different thing. He was tall, somewhere in his mid-30s, built in the way that regular gym time produces when you have the hours to spend on it. Dark sport coat, fitted shirt underneath collar, open hair arranged with intention. The way he moved into my apartment told me everything. No hesitation at the threshold, no fractional pause while his eyes mapped an unfamiliar room. He didn't look around at all. He crossed straight to the side table next to the couch and put his keys down on it right beside the ceramic bowl where my own keys had lived for 22 years. My stomach dropped like a stone. "Grandpa," Cody's voice came out barely louder than a breath. "Breathe." I realized I had gone still. Nadine dropped her purse onto the couch and said something to Brennan that the microphone didn't catch too quiet too far from the lens. He responded with a short laugh, relaxed and easy, the laugh of a man who felt completely at home and headed for the kitchen. I watched him pull my refrigerator open, reach down to the bottom shelf for one of my craft beers, and lever the cap off against the counter edge the way a person does when they know exactly where the bottle opener lives, but don't bother going for it. He had visited often enough to know where I kept the beer, often enough to have a preferred counter edge. Kevin had come to stand just behind us. I heard him draw a sharp breath the moment Brennan opened that refrigerator door. "That's enough," Kevin said, low-controlled. "No," Cody said quietly. "We see all of it." On the screen, Nadine came back down the hallway holding 2 wine glasses, the good ones from the cabinet above the dishwasher, the crystal set we'd been given as a wedding present 25 years ago, that only came out for company. She placed them on the coffee table. Brennan came through from the kitchen, carrying his beer and her wine, and the two of them sank onto my couch together, close with the unhurried ease of people who had shared that cushion many times before. The crystal caught the glow of the lamp. I watched Nadine tuck her legs up under her and settle her head against Brennan's shoulder. He folded his arm around her without looking, without any self-consciousness, pure reflex worn smooth by repetition. His thumb traced a small, idle circle against her shoulder. I had done that. That exact gesture on that exact couch 20 years ago on a Friday evening with the television on. My thumb moving in that same small arc. Something structural gave way inside my chest. "There," Cody said under his breath. Brennan had set his beer down and gotten to his feet. He crossed to the hall closet, the one just inside the front door, where I kept my work coats and a few older jackets, and pulled it open. He stood browsing it the way you browse your own wardrobe when you're looking for something to throw on. Then he reached in and pulled out the navy jacket, my oldest good jacket. I had bought it the week I signed my first major independent contract 30 years ago, a structural assessment for a commercial development in Zionsville, Indiana. After that, it was the jacket I wore to every meaningful professional occasion. Every project launch, every milestone. Nadine had teased me about it for years, called it my lucky jacket, told me it was time to let it go. I kept it anyway. Some things you hold on to not because they're useful, but because of what they stand for. Brennan Ashford pulled it on over his sport coat. It sat a little wide across the shoulders, the cuffs running a half-inch past where they should. He turned to face Nadine and spread his arms in a theatrical little gesture. "Well, how do I look?" She laughed and reached up to straighten the collar, her fingers smoothing down the lapel with a practiced familiarity that landed harder than anything I had watched yet. Not because of the touch itself, because of her expression while she did it. She was happy. Genuinely, unguardedly happy in a way I hadn't seen her look at me in longer than I could honestly recall. I took a step back from the laptop. My legs felt uncertain. Kevin caught my arm. "Latina, I'm all right." I was not all right. My vision had developed a strange brightness at the edges, the floor under me suddenly feeling like it belonged to some other room in some other life. "I'm all right." Cody looked up at me, his face carrying a grief he was doing his level best to keep under wraps for my sake. "We have enough," he said. "The cloud is recording. Everything we need is already saved." I nodded. My jaw ached from holding it clenched. My hands, those thick-knuckled hands that had spent 35 years on structural work, were shaking at my sides in a way I had no control over. "Close it," I said. Cody shut the laptop. The room went very quiet. The sprinkler outside had cycled off. The dog down the street had stopped. It was pushing midnight in a suburb outside Indianapolis, Indiana, and I stood in my son's living room arriving at a certainty I hadn't let myself reach before my marriage wasn't something that had been coming apart slowly. It had already been over long before tonight, long before I'd had any inkling. "Okay," I said at last. My voice came out more level than I had any right to expect. "Tell me the next step." Cody opened his laptop again, but not to the camera feed. He brought up a document he had clearly written ahead of time, a numbered list clean, and ordered the kind of thing you put together when you need to move through a sequence without trusting your own memory in the heat of the moment. He angled the screen toward me, and I read down it while Kevin stood at my shoulder doing the same. "We start with the bank," Cody said. "Tonight, right now." He was right that it couldn't wait. Nadine and Brennan were in my apartment at that very moment, possibly working through the bedroom closet looking for the lockbox that was no longer there, possibly going over the property transfer, possibly taking care of whatever else they had planned. Every hour we sat still was an hour they had to move money, file paperwork, or erase a trail. "Most major banks run a 24-hour account security line," Cody said. "Not the main customer service number, the dedicated security line. You state that you're the primary account holder, and you report suspected unauthorized transactions and request an immediate freeze. They'll put you through security questions. They'll want you to describe the activity in question. You walk them through the transfers to the external account, the pattern across 11 months, the specific amounts. You don't need a police report to get the freeze started. The bank has authority to act on its own the moment you report suspected fraud." I reached for my phone. "Hold on," Cody said. He slid a handwritten sheet across the coffee table. "The direct security line for your bank is on there along with the account numbers and the dates and amounts I pulled from your statements. Read straight from it. You won't have to hold anything in your head under pressure, and it'll move faster." I looked at the page. Every number was accounted for, every date, every flagged transaction laid out in the sequence a bank's automated system would most likely ask for them. My grandson had put this together before he ever set foot in my apartment tonight. He hadn't just brought evidence. He'd arrived with a complete recovery plan fully built, waiting for the moment I was ready. My throat tightened, and it had nothing to do with anger. I dialed. The security line picked up on the second ring. The representative had the steady, unhurried manner of someone trained to talk with distressed account holders at 2 a.m. without adding to what they're already carrying. I worked through Cody's list dates, amounts, the pattern of transfers to the external routing number, my credentials, the security questions I'd set up years ago and never imagined having to use. Kevin sat on the edge of the sofa with his forearms across his knees, listening. Cody watched me steadily, one finger resting on the sheet, ready to point to the next line the moment I needed it. The representative confirmed the transactions I described, ran me through 3 separate identity checks, and then said the words I had been waiting for. Mr. Greer, I'm placing an immediate hold on all outgoing transactions from both the checking and savings accounts, effective right now. No funds can be transferred, withdrawn, or applied to any external account until you authorize the hold to be lifted in person at a branch with valid identification. You'll also receive a case number for your records. Would you like me to flag the account for escalation to our fraud investigation team? Yes, I said. Please. When the call ended, the room felt changed. Not lighter exactly, but different. The way a room feels after you've pinpointed the source of a structural failure and understood that whatever was bleeding out has finally been stopped. Be good, Cody said. He took back the handwritten sheet and drew a clean line through the first item on the list. Next is the credit cards. Same process, different number. Tamara appeared in the hallway entrance in her robe, drawn out by the voices at that hour. Kevin caught her eye and gave a small nod that seemed to carry more information than a full sentence would have. Tamara went to the kitchen and returned with a plate of toast, set it on the coffee table without a word, and settled into the corner chair. The credit card security call ran 11 minutes. The backup card Nadine had used for the travel booking and the restaurant charges was flagged. The account frozen, and a dispute opened for the travel charge Cody had traced back to the unauthorized savings transfer. Under the Fair Credit Billing Act, my rights as primary cardholder included disputing any charge I hadn't personally authorized, and the representative walked me through the formal process with the same unhurried competence as the first call. When it was over, Cody drew a second line through his list. Now the attorney, he said, checking the time on his screen. I know it's late. I'm going to send an email tonight to the family attorney I researched last week, an evidence summary I put together, plus a request for an emergency consultation first thing tomorrow morning. You don't need to do anything on that one except tell me I can send it in your name. Send it, I said. His fingers moved quickly across the keyboard for several minutes, while Kevin ate a piece of toast, and I sat holding the coffee mug Tamara had quietly topped off at some point, without my noticing. She'd done. Cody drew a third line. Then he looked up. Grandpa, there are 2 items left: the police report and the property recorder's office. Those have to wait until they open in the morning, but everything that could be moved tonight has been locked down. I settled back in the chair. Outside it was fully dark and fully still, the deep quiet of a suburb well past midnight. Somewhere across the city in my apartment, Nadine and Brennan were still there, working through whatever they had come to do, with no idea that every financial door they'd been counting on had just been shut from the other side. She'll figure it out in the morning, Kevin said quietly, when the cards stop working. Yes, Cody said. She will. He closed the laptop and held my gaze. Which is why tomorrow has to move fast. Can you sleep, Grandpa? I nearly laughed. Try, he said in a tone so close to his father's, it brought me up short. You need to be sharp tomorrow. None of this holds together if you don't. I put the mug down and got to my feet. Guest room. I asked Tamara. Top of the stairs, first door on your left, she said. Towels are already on the bed. I went up slowly, one hand trailing the rail. Behind me, I could hear Cody quietly laying out the morning schedule for Kevin, his voice low, even, and precise. I caught him mention the Indianapolis Division of Police online fraud portal, heard him confirm the web address. Cody would not close his laptop until every item on that list had a line drawn through it. I shut the guest room door and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark. $19,400. 25 years. A navy jacket that had been hanging in my closet since before Nadine and I had exchanged a single word. I pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes and breathed. Then I lay down and I waited for morning. It arrived the way it always does. After a night you don't actually sleep through, not with any grace. Just pale light working its way through the gap in the curtains, the sound of Kevin's coffee maker starting up downstairs, the particular quiet of a house where another family is still sleeping. And you are the only one lying on your back, staring at the ceiling with your shoes still on. I hadn't meant to keep my shoes on. I had sat on the edge of that bed and simply never gotten around to taking them off. I came downstairs at 6:15. Cody was already at the kitchen table, laptop open, coffee in hand, dressed and ready as though he hadn't slept, or had slept 3 hours and decided that was enough. He looked up when I came through the doorway. She left the building at 7:52 last night, he said. I checked the entry log this morning. Brennan left 4 minutes after her. They were in the apartment for just under 2 hours. I poured myself coffee and stood at the counter with it. The lockbox was gone when she got there, I said. It wasn't a question. I had moved it the evening before ahead of placing the camera. There's no way to know exactly what she found or didn't find, Cody said. But the deed and the important documents are in your briefcase in your trunk. Whatever she came for, she didn't walk out with it. That was something. Not a great deal, but something. We drove to the apartment at 8:30 after Cody confirmed through the building's entry log that Nadine's key fob hadn't registered since the night before. Her car was gone from the garage. She had left for work or somewhere else carrying whatever she'd managed to collect from 2 hours of searching an apartment, whose most critical contents had already been moved out. The condo felt different when I turned the key. I'm not sure I can fully account for it. The furniture hadn't moved. The morning light came through the windows at the same angle it always did on a Wednesday. The ceramic bowl on the side table where I kept my keys was right where it belonged. But the place felt like somewhere I was visiting rather than somewhere I lived, the way a job site feels, after the crew has packed up and the building is technically complete, but no one has moved in yet. Present, but not inhabited. Finished, but not alive. Cody went straight to the ficus. He crouched down, parted the lower branches with practiced efficiency, and retrieved the camera the way you retrieve something you built and know exactly how to dismantle. He checked the device, confirmed the cloud recording had captured everything, and tucked it into his jacket pocket. I walked through the rooms. I wasn't hunting for evidence of what the previous night had held. I didn't need to. But I noticed things the way you notice things when you finally started paying attention after a long stretch of not doing so. The crystal wine glasses were back in the cabinet above the dishwasher, washed and returned to their spots as though they'd never been lifted down. Brennan's beer bottle had been pulled from the recycling bin. The hall closet door wasn't quite latched the way I always latched it. And my navy jacket was back on its hanger. I stood in front of that open closet for a long moment. Someone had replaced it carefully. Shoulders smoothed, collar straightened, hung in exactly the position it had always occupied. As though it had never left the hanger. As though none of the previous night had happened. I reached in, lifted the jacket off, folded it with care, and tucked it under my arm to carry to the bag I was packing. Some things you don't leave behind. I moved through the bedroom with a methodical steadiness, work clothes, personal documents from the nightstand drawer, the photograph from my mother's house that sat on the dresser, a small framed picture of Kevin at his college graduation that had lived on the bedroom bookshelf for 15 years. I packed deliberately, without rushing the way you pack when you already know you won't be coming back. Cody appeared in the doorway. "How are you doing, Grandpa?" "Finishing up," I said. He watched me fold a shirt and set it in the bag. "The attorney's office called this morning. They can fit you in at 10 o'clock. "Good." And I filed the online report with the Indianapolis Division of Police Fraud Unit last night, before I turned in, he said. "They'll want a follow-up interview probably sometime this week. The detective who handles financial crimes cases will reach out to you directly." I zipped the bag and lifted it from the bed. The room looked bare in the spots where my things had been small absences that add up together into the shape of a departure. I picked up the framed graduation photograph and held it for a moment. Kevin, at 22, squinting against the sun, diploma in hand, grinning the way a young man grins when he's still certain the best of everything is waiting for him just ahead. I set it gently on top of the folded navy jacket in the bag. "Ready, mate," I said. We carried everything down to the car in 2 trips. The elevator quiet between us both ways. When I loaded the last bag into the trunk alongside my briefcase, I stopped in the parking garage and looked back at the building entrance for a moment. 30 years of mortgage payments. The deed with my name on it safe in my briefcase. The camera footage stored on Cody's cloud drive. I had come into this building with nothing but a down payment and 30 years stretching out in front of me. I was leaving with everything that had actually mattered and walking away from everything that had turned out to be hollow. I closed the trunk. "Attorney's office is on North Meridian Street." Cody said, keys already in hand. "I'll drive." The parking garage was gray and flat in the morning light. I studied my grandson standing there, 19 years old, navy blue backpack slung over one shoulder, the dark circles under his eyes softening now. "Cody," I said. He looked over. "Thank you." Nothing else. 2 words because 2 was all that situation required. He gave a single nod, the kind men in our family have always exchanged when a thing is too heavy for elaboration. Then we got in the car. Carolyn Radle's practice was on the 4th floor of an office building on North Meridian Street, 2 blocks up from the State House. I had gone 25 years of marriage without ever requiring a family attorney. Walking into that room, the shelves of case volumes, the Indianapolis skyline through the glass, the box of tissues sitting at the corner of the desk, as a quiet declaration of what kind of work happened in here, I felt the full weight of that fact. Carolyn Radle was somewhere in her mid-50s, precise and composed, reading glasses resting on top of her head. She had the quality of a person who had absorbed years' worth of painful disclosures and learned to hold them steadily without looking away. Cody had tracked her down through someone Kevin knew professionally. She'd gone through his email summary the night before and had a yellow legal pad thick with notes waiting when she greeted me at the desk. "Mr. Greer," she said, "I've read through everything your grandson forwarded. I want to say something before we get into the details. What you've laid out, assuming the documentation bears it out, may constitute criminal fraud under Indiana law, separate and apart from the civil family court matters. We're looking at 2 tracks running at the same time, and both need handling. Tell me what I need to do," I said. She uncapped her pen. "You've already taken the most critical step by getting those accounts frozen last night. The hemorrhaging has stopped. Now we move to lock down the assets through the court itself." She walked me through it. Under Indiana law, either party in a dissolving marriage could petition the Domestic Relations Court for a temporary restraining order on all jointly held marital assets. The order would bar Nadine from selling, transferring, pledging, or otherwise moving any shared property, the condo included, for the duration of the proceedings. "I can put that motion in front of a judge this afternoon," she said. "The evidence you're bringing gives me every reason to expect it'll be granted within a day." Cody's pen hadn't stopped moving. "And what about the property transfer she was putting together?" I asked. "The one bearing what appears to be a traced version of my signature." Carolyn's attention sharpened visibly. "That document taken together with the financial transfer pattern builds a strong fraud claim. A forged instrument used to obtain property is a felony in Indiana. The asset in question here is a fully paid-off condo in Marion County. The value alone puts it squarely in felony territory." She paused. "The police report your grandson filed last night drives the criminal side. My office drives the civil and family court side. The two run in parallel. I let that settle." Felony. The word didn't echo, it just sat there dense and still. "The condo," I said. "Once I file this afternoon, that property is frozen. Nothing gets recorded against it without a court order." She put her pen down. "Mr. Greer, I'll be frank. Indiana divides marital assets equitably, which means fairly not down the middle. A court weighs each spouse's contribution and looks hard at any dissipation of marital funds. A documented pattern of secret transfers and an attempted fraudulent conveyance that is going to matter at distribution. Significantly." Cody glanced up. "Meaning what on a practical level?" "Meaning Nadine could walk away with considerably less than half," Carolyn said. "Possibly well short of that, depending on where the fraud claim lands. I let my mind go to $19,400. To flights booked against my retirement account, to 41 minutes in my apartment, and a form disguised as a research grant application." "File the order," I said. She made the note. "I'll need signatures on several documents before you leave, and I'll want you available for a follow-up later this week once the financial crimes detective makes contact." She held my gaze over the top of her glasses. "One last thing, Mr. Greer. Does Nadine have any reason yet to think you're aware of what she's done?" "No," I said. "Good. See that it stays that way." 40 minutes later, we were in the elevator heading down Cody, pressing his notebook back into his pack. Me gripping a folder of signed paperwork that felt at once routine and enormous. "She's filing this afternoon," Cody said as the floors ticked by. "I know. Come tomorrow, Nadine can't move the condo and can't access any joint account." He went quiet a moment. "She's going to sense something is off very soon if she doesn't already. Her card was rejected last night. I'd turned that over during the meeting. Nadine would have run a card by now, a cup of coffee, a meter, something trivial. When it failed, she'd know it wasn't a glitch. She was far too sharp to mistake frozen for broken." "How long before she connects it to me?" I asked. Cody thought it through. "First instinct will be bank error. She'll call the number on the back of the card and they'll tell her the account is frozen at the primary holder's request." He looked at me. "A few hours? This afternoon at the outside?" The elevator released us into the lobby. Out through the glass, North Meridian Street was moving with the midday crowd Indianapolis deep into an ordinary Wednesday. "Then we can't wait on the tickets," I said. Cody had his phone out before I finished the sentence. We stayed in the car, parked outside the building while he worked. The reservation Nadine had booked was through a major international carrier. One itinerary, two names, Walter Greer and Nadine Greer, round-trip Indianapolis to Istanbul, connecting through Newark departure in 6 days. Charged to the credit card now frozen. Flagged already as part of the Fair Credit Billing Act dispute Cody had opened with the bank the previous night. "The dispute is in the system," he said, eyes on his screen. "That charge is reversing. When it does, the payment behind this booking collapses." He looked up. "Airlines can cancel outright when the funding source goes away. I want to get their customer relations line on the phone before that happens on its own, so we control what happens next. And what does happen next? We rebook, he said. Different names. He dialed. 22 minutes. I sat in the passenger seat, watching the lunch crowd thread along North Meridian Street, while Cody worked through the airline's process with a steadiness and attention to detail that made me think, not for the first time, that Indiana University had no idea what they had on their hands with this kid. He laid out the fraud situation without over-explaining, got the cancellation confirmed, and asked about seats on the same routing. Then he put the call on hold and turned to me. 4 seats open on that same departure. Same flight, same Newark connection, same Istanbul arrival. Dad got on the phone with Tamara this morning while you were in with Carolyn. They want to be there, Grandpa. Both of them. 2 years they've been talking about traveling with you, and they've got the time banked. He paused. My passport's current. I already checked. I sat there looking at this 19-year-old in the passenger seat of his 10-year-old Toyota Camry, a kid who had quietly shielded me for 3 weeks, then spent the last 16 hours unraveling a fraud piece by piece, and was now sitting in a parking spot on a Wednesday at noon, mentioning almost as an afterthought that he'd already confirmed his travel documents. Something cracked open inside me. Not the way it had the night before that had been sharp structural. This was something else entirely. Something that felt against all odds, like relief. They don't need to do this, I said. The words came out unsteadier than I'd planned. They know that, Cody said. That's the whole point. He held my eyes for just a beat, calm, unhurried, then put the phone back to his ear. Yes, still here. 4 seats on that departure, please. Kevin and Tamara paid for all 4 tickets. No discussion, no hesitation. That last part I discovered later, the same evening when I tried to raise the subject, and Kevin shut it down with a single flat look so precisely, the way my own father used to end a discussion, that I let it go without another word. Cody handled everything that followed: seat assignments, passport details, confirmation emails pushed out to each of us. By 3 o'clock, it was settled. 4 seats. Walter Greer, Kevin Greer, Tamara Greer, Cody Greer. Departing Indianapolis in 6 days. Nadine's name appeared nowhere on the reservation. I sat with that for a while. The trip she had arranged as a smokescreen bankrolled with money drained from my accounts, positioned as a gesture of goodwill to soften me, while she finished dismantling everything else that trip now belonged to us. Stripped of her design, handed to the people who actually mattered, turned from an instrument of manipulation into something worth having. I hadn't expected to feel that particular satisfaction this quickly. But there it was. Late that afternoon, I was at Kevin's kitchen table when my phone lit up. Nadine's number. I watched it ring through 4 full cycles, thumb hovering, and let it roll to voicemail. 30 seconds later, a text came through Walter: something is wrong with the bank account. My card isn't working. Can you call me? I set the phone face down on the table. Cody appeared from the living room, clocked the phone, and read my face without asking. She just hit the freeze. He nodded slowly. She'll try a few more times tonight before she accepts it isn't a glitch. He pulled out a chair and sat across from me. Carolyn filed the restraining order 2 hours ago. By morning, it'll be on the court's record. Nadine won't be able to move the condo or touch any joint asset without a judge signing off. I looked at the phone lying face down on Kevin's table. 25 years of a life built together, and here was what remained of it: a missed call and a text about a frozen account from a woman who still had no idea how thoroughly the floor had dropped out from under her. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. 6 days, I said. Cody glanced up. To Istanbul, I said. He let a small, quiet smile cross his face. 6 days, he agreed. The guest room at Kevin's house faced east. I came to know this with precision because for 5 mornings running I was awake before dawn, lying on top of the comforter, shoes off but otherwise dressed, watching the dark on the other side of the curtains make its slow passage toward light. First the solid black of deep night, then a gradual softening toward gray that happened too slowly to observe directly. You could only register that it had shifted. Then the thin, pale line at the curtain's edge announcing that morning had arrived, ready or not. 35 years of construction work had put the early rising habit so far into my bones that it ran on its own, now indifferent to grief, indifferent to exhaustion, indifferent to the weight of a situation that had no blueprint and no precedent in my experience. You got up, you assessed what the day required, you went to work. That had been the rhythm for decades. What those 5 days added, what I had no preparation for, was waking early with nothing left to build. That was the specific texture of that week. Not emptiness, precisely, but the feeling you got standing on a completed job site after the crew had gone home and the punch list had been signed off. Everything structurally sound, everything in its right position. The work finished, and yet the space still carrying that waiting quality, not yet occupied, not yet animated by the life it had been designed to hold. One life was behind me. The next one hadn't started. In between, I counted things. Nadine called 11 times. I know the exact number because counting gave the restless part of my mind something concrete to do, a small act of record-keeping in a situation that had already demanded considerable documentation and would demand more before it was over. 11 calls across 5 days starting Wednesday evening when the account freeze first made itself felt in her daily routine, climbing Thursday morning when a trip to her bank branch confirmed the hold had been placed deliberately at the request of the primary account holder. That Thursday call I answered. I listened to 12 seconds of Nadine's voice, tight controlled, pitched in the register she used when she was furious and had calculated that control would serve her better than showing it. Then ended the call without saying a word. She rang back inside 4 minutes. I watched the phone and left it alone. What I felt during those calls wasn't what I would have predicted. The anger was there, a steady, low-grade heat, nothing like the sharp flare of that first night. The grief was there too, the dull, particular ache that comes with the close of something long. What I hadn't counted on was the clarity. Seeing for the first time without the distortion that trust had always imposed the actual shape of what I had been living inside. Her messages shifted as the days accumulated. Wednesday was disbelief, the assured tone of a woman confident that a single phone call would clear up a technical mistake. Thursday carried real anger, clipped vowels, compressed sentences, the cadence of someone who had run into an obstacle she hadn't planned for. By Friday, the register had dropped, gone softer and warmer, moving into the frequency I recognized from 2.5 decades of marriage as the one Nadine reached for when warmth was the most efficient route to what she needed. I returned none of them. Carolyn Riedel called Thursday afternoon. She reported that Judge Lorena Okafor of the Marion County Domestic Relations Court had reviewed the evidence summary and signed the temporary protective order within 18 hours of filing. The order was broad. It barred Nadine from any transfer, sale, or encumbrance of jointly held assets, the condo, the joint accounts, any vehicle titled in both names, for the full duration of the proceedings. A process server had delivered the order to Nadine that same morning. She would have been holding it before that Friday call came in, Carolyn said. That's likely what shifted the tone. She got served and decided warmth was a cheaper strategy than resistance, I said. That's how I'd read it, Carolyn said. It won't hold. Once she retains counsel, the approach will change. But for now, let it run. Don't engage. I had no intention of engaging. Friday afternoon brought Detective Gordon Spear, whose voice on the phone carried the quality of a man who had run enough financial crimes interviews to know that patience pulled more out of a witness than pressure ever did. He took me back through the same ground. Cody had already mapped the timeline of the transfers, the forged document, the key fob entry logs, the camera footage asking precise questions at each turn. I answered the way I'd learned to answer when the stakes were real. Give exactly what the question calls for, nothing beyond it. Let the facts carry their own weight. At the end of the call, Detective Spear told me the case had been formally opened and that Nadine would receive a request for voluntary interview within the coming days. The financial transfer pattern, combined with the forged signature impression, was sufficient grounds to move the investigation forward. He was careful not to promise outcomes, the mark of someone who understood that an investigation is a process, not a verdict. When the line went dead, Cody looked up from the folder spread open across Kevin's kitchen table. "How do you feel?" he asked. I held the question for a genuine moment before answering because he'd asked it honestly and deserved more than the reflexive fine that men raised, the way I was raised, tend to produce without thinking. Like I spent 30 years on a job site, I said, working it through as I spoke, and just found out the foundation was poured wrong from the very first day. The building's still standing, but I understand now why certain doors never hung quite level and why certain floors always had that slight give in the northwest corner. I paused. And I know that understanding it, even when not understanding, felt easier is better. Cody held my gaze for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "That's about right." Life at Kevin's place settled into a quiet order, not by design, but because that's what time does when you stop bracing against it. Tamara put meals on the table each evening with the instinctive generosity of a woman who knew that a plate of something good could reach a man in places words hadn't yet earned access to. Beef stew on Thursday, the kind that fell apart at the touch of a fork. Pork chops and cornbread on Friday sent a smell through the house that pulled me backward toward some earlier version of myself. One that predated everything I now carried, a version I was slowly learning to remember without the grief overtaking the whole of it. Saturday afternoon, Kevin and I spread a jigsaw puzzle across the dining room table. 2,000 pieces, an aerial photograph of Indianapolis, that flat Midwestern grid stretched wide the White River, tracing its slow bend through the frame. 3 hours we sat there sorting edges from field pieces, barely speaking, drawn into the particular comfort that comes from working alongside someone who has known you your entire life without needing to fill the silence with words. What I found in that puzzle, the small, clean certainty of it, was something I hadn't realized I needed. Each piece belonged in exactly one place. You examined it, tried it, seeded it, or set it aside and reached for another. There was no ambiguity to negotiate. Nothing required you to interpret the signals or second-guess the fit. Right now, that kind of problem was exactly the kind I was starving for. Cody parked himself at the kitchen table each evening, his laptop open, tracking the legal filings through Carolyn's office portal, and keeping the documentation in order with the same steady diligence he'd applied since the very first day. Sometimes I'd watch him from the armchair near the living room doorway, this 19-year-old kid hunched over a glowing screen in his grandfather's son's kitchen, and feel something that didn't have a proper name. Gratitude was in there, but it wasn't nearly the whole of it. Nobody had recruited him for any of this. He'd taken it on because he'd looked at what was happening and concluded it was wrong, and then he'd gone ahead and done something about it. I knew that quality when I saw it. My entire career had been built on a version of it, the refusal to sidestep a problem just because solving it cost something. He'd absorbed it somewhere along the way, I let myself believe a portion of it traced back to me. Sunday evening, he lifted his eyes from the screen and said simply, "Bags packed." "Since Friday," I told him. The smile that crossed his face was the one he used when a thing had gone exactly right, restrained, almost private, but warmer for all that. That night, I slept more soundly than I had since the Tuesday. Nadine walked out in her dark blazer and handed me my first real reason to stand at a door and watch her leave. Monday broke gray and cool, an early June morning in Indianapolis that couldn't commit to spring or anything that came after it. I stood at Kevin's kitchen window at 5:30 with a mug of coffee, watching the neighbor's maple tree stir in the low street wind. The leaves were full and darkly green, now that particular shade that makes Indiana look like itself in summer. The same color that had framed every outdoor morning I'd known in this city. My mind drifted to the maple in front of my own building, the one I'd put in the ground 22 years ago, on an Arbor Day weekend, 5-gallon bucket, more hope than I could now fully justify. I didn't know whether it would still be standing by the time the courts had worked through all of it, and the condo and its contents, and the life bound up in both, were finally resolved. I decided it would be. Maples don't give up. They don't wait around for the people who planted them. They just go on doing what they were made for, roots deeper each year, canopy wider season after season, paying no attention to the human arrangements rearranging themselves below. Standing in my son's kitchen at 5:30 on a Monday, that struck me as something genuinely worth holding. No missed calls from Nadine. Her last message had come in Saturday evening, 31 seconds of it, her voice carrying a blankness I hadn't heard before. Something from which all the heat and all the warmth and the composed control of the earlier calls had been drained completely. She said nothing about the account. She made no mention of confusion or misunderstanding. What she said was, "Walter, call me when you're ready to talk." Then 31 seconds of background sound wherever she was before the system ended the recording. I'd played it once, standing in the dark of the guest room, trying to find somewhere inside those 31 seconds the woman who'd stood at the company picnic in the white sundress. I couldn't. So I deleted it. I rinsed the mug, set it on the left side of the drying rack, the way Tamara kept things, and stood with both palms flat on the counter, looking out at the maple in the pale morning gray. "Ready," Cody's voice from somewhere down the hall. Backpack already on boarding pass, pulled up on his phone, 19 years old, and fully composed for whatever the day was going to ask of him. I dried my hands. "Ready?" I said, and for the first time in 5 days, I said it, and meant it, straight through. Kevin's pickup truck held 4 people and 4 bags with room to spare. Tamara had packed sandwiches for the drive wrapped in wax paper, the way her mother had shown her, laid in a small cooler in the back seat, next to 4 bottles of water and a container of the shortbread cookies she had baked Sunday evening, while Cody and I were going over the last of the documents Carolyn had sent. The moment I registered what she'd done, I had to turn toward the window for a beat. There was something in the specificity of that care that I wasn't quite ready to look at directly. We backed out of the Carmel driveway at 6:15. The route to Indianapolis International Airport passed through the sort of early June morning Indiana could occasionally produce, as if making the case for itself. Sky pale gold at the edge highway, nearly empty, the city still in its drowsy half-light. I rode in the back seat beside Cody and let Indianapolis move past the glass. 60 years I had lived here. I had covered these highways 10,000 times. The exits lived in my hands, not my head. I knew which lanes locked up and at what hour, knew exactly how the downtown skyline presented itself on a clear morning when you came at it from the north, the State House dome lit up in the early sun. I had built things here. My work was threaded into the structure of this city. What came to me watching it all slide past was that I wasn't leaving Indianapolis. I was leaving a particular life I had lived inside Indianapolis, the life that held Nadine and the condo, and 25 years of a marriage I was now forced to understand had been hollowed out at its core, far longer than I'd let myself look at. That life was already finished. It had ended before I had any idea it was ending. What remained was the city, the maple trees, Kevin's house in Carmel Cody's dorm room at Indiana University, the job sites still standing under my name. None of that was going anywhere. My phone buzzed with a text from Carolyn Riedel. TRO confirmed on record as of this morning. All joint assets fully protected. Travel safe, Mr. Greer. I held the phone toward Cody. He read it. One nod. 10 minutes after that, Detective Spear called. Mr. Greer, he said. I'm calling to let you know we have 2 officers at Indianapolis International this morning working in coordination with airport security. Based on the booking records and her stated travel plans, we expect Mrs. Greer to reach the departures level somewhere between 8 o'clock and 8:30. We'll approach at that point. A brief pause. There's nothing you need to do on your end. Check in as you normally would. We'll take it from there. Thank you, Detective, I said. When I put the phone down, Kevin's eyes found me in the rearview mirror. They're going to be there. 2 officers, I said, coordinating with airport security. From the front seat, Tamara reached back and laid her hand briefly over mine. No words. She didn't offer any. Beside me, Cody had gone quiet, different from the intent, purposeful quiet he'd carried all week. This was something stiller and deeper, like a man turning over the gap between what he'd helped build and what it was now about to become. I recognized that feeling from the inside. There is a distance, a real and specific one, between setting something in motion and standing at the moment it lands. Cody, I said, keeping my voice low. He looked over. Whatever happens when we walk in there, I said, you made this happen, all of it. What's coming next stopped me cold when I first understood the full weight of it. Not just what had been taken from me, but how long and how deliberately it had been happening. Before we get there, I want to ask you if you discovered that someone you had trusted completely had been quietly working against you. Would you confront them face to face, or would you wait until every piece of proof was in your hands? I want you to know I understand that. He looked at me for a moment with those steady dark eyes that had taken in far too much for 19 years and handled it better than most men twice that age ever would. You did it, Grandpa, he said. I just handed you the tools. I shook my head. You built the tools. You brought them to me. You held them steady when my hands were shaking. I let that sit. That's not nothing. That's everything. He held my gaze a beat longer, then turned back toward the window. His jaw tightened once the tell he had when he was pressing something down. Don't make me cry before we even get to the airport, he said. I laughed. A real one, sudden, unguarded, the kind I hadn't managed in what felt like a very long while. Kevin laughed from up front. Tamara made a noise that was clearly trying not to become a laugh and failing at it. The laughter passed and left something cleaner behind. Not happiness, not exactly. Not yet. But that particular lightness that arrives when you have been hauling something terrible, and the load has finally genuinely begun to ease. Indianapolis International Airport materialized ahead of us, the access road sweeping upward toward the departures level. The familiar signage, the steady flow of early travelers pulling luggage from trunks, making their way toward the glass doors, with the purposeful shuffle of people who have a flight to catch. An ordinary Monday morning at an American airport, except that somewhere inside that building or moving toward it right now through Indianapolis traffic, Nadine was finishing getting ready for a trip she still believed she was taking, wheeling her Louis Vuitton suitcase to the door, checking her passport, calling a rideshare because her cards were frozen, and the parking garage app was no longer available to her. She was on her way. Kevin pulled into the departures lane and stopped. "End of the road for me," he said. "Curbside only." I reached from the back seat and gripped his shoulder. He laid his hand over mine for a moment. The same gesture Tamara had made on the highway, the family's quiet language, the one spoken through touch rather than words. "See you in Istanbul," I said. He grinned. "Gate B12, don't be late." I stepped out into the cool morning air. Cody was beside me, and Tamara was already at the trunk, pulling bags free with her characteristic efficiency. The terminal doors slid apart ahead of us and exhaled a breath of recycled air, along with the distant sound of departure announcements. I lifted my bag. I walked in. The doors closed at my back, and the airport absorbed us completely. Indianapolis International, on a Monday morning, had a quality I had encountered many times at the start of business trips, at the close of holidays, in the thin pre-dawn light of early departures, when the whole business of human movement felt at once necessary and faintly absurd. The overhead lighting was the precise shade of institutional purpose. The floors carried a polish that sent back reflections of rolling bags and moving feet. The air had that specific terminal flavor, climate-managed and recirculated, threaded through with a coffee smell that existed nowhere else on Earth, as though some long-ago chemist had isolated the compound and sold the license exclusively to airport concessionaires. I had always moved through spaces like this with my focus compressed and my boarding pass ready. Not this morning. Cody came up on my left, navy blue backpack settled on both shoulders, hands relaxed at his sides. Tamara was on my right, her carry-on tracking smoothly behind her, packed light enough that it never veered or pulled. Somewhere behind us in the check-in current, Kevin was working through the process with his familiar mild irritation at anything he found needlessly inefficient. I kept my pace measured and my eyes working the room. 35 years of job sites had built a particular habit into me, the habit structural engineers develop of reading a space not by cataloging what's present, but by sensing what is wrong. The hairline fracture along a load-bearing corner. The floor that looked level until you understood what a not-quite-level floor looked like. The thing that passed unnoticed right up until the moment you knew what to look for, after which you couldn't unsee it. I found her near the far end of the check-in row. Nadine stood at a self-service kiosk, positioned 3/4 away from us. The Louis Vuitton suitcase she'd bought 3 years ago on a Nashville shopping trip stood upright beside her. She wore a deep navy blazer over dark, tailored slacks, her hair pinned up the way she wore it when the occasion seemed to warrant the effort, her bearing carrying the composed authority of a woman who had already determined how the day was going to proceed. From where I stood 40 feet back in the Monday morning crowd, she looked exactly as she always did when she was heading somewhere. Put together, deliberate, certain. She hadn't spotted us. I stopped walking. Not from doubt. I hadn't felt doubt since the night Cody placed that folder on my kitchen table, and I studied the numbers and understood precisely what they told me. I stopped because the moment earned a breath. Because 60 years of living had made it plain that certain things once put into motion do not reverse. And before I put this one into motion, I wanted one still second, just one, to stand in it and confirm I was ready. Cody stopped alongside me without being asked. He had an exact instinct for the character of a pause, for reading the difference between someone who is hesitating and someone who is simply gathering themselves before they act. He didn't ask what I was looking at. He didn't check whether I was all right. He stopped and held still because he understood that this moment was mine to open, and it would open when I chose. Tamara stopped a half step behind us. I heard the soft click of her carry-on wheels going quiet. 40 feet ahead, Nadine was pressing the kiosk screen with the slightly firmer touch of someone who has met an unexpected obstacle and is pushing through it. I watched her head tip a fraction. I watched her chin come up, the small recalibration of a person whose expectations have just been interrupted by a machine refusing to cooperate. What the kiosk understood, and what she hadn't yet fully absorbed, was that the payment behind her ticket had been reversed through the bank's dispute process, that the reservation in her name was no longer backed by valid funds, that the system could not generate a boarding pass because there was no longer a valid ticket to board. She opened her purse and brought out her phone. I watched her thumb move across the screen. I watched her lift it to her ear. I watched the instant the call rolled to voicemail, the barely visible adjustment in her posture, the practiced composure of a woman who had always been skilled at absorbing unexpected variables without letting them show. She was calling me. In my jacket pocket, the phone buzzed once, then twice. I left it where it was. Cody glanced over, a look that asked nothing and said everything. I drew one slow, even breath. The kind I take on a job site when I've just pinpointed the source of a failure and I'm about to deliver news the client isn't going to welcome. The breath before the hard conversation you have both been building toward for longer than either of you was prepared to acknowledge. Okay, I said. We walked. The check-in area stretched roughly 60 feet across, travelers moving in both directions through the space between the kiosks, the counters, and the entrance at our backs. We covered it in about 20 seconds, and in those 20 seconds, I watched Nadine work the kiosk. A second time, watched her exhale through her nose in a way I had witnessed 10,000 times over 25 years. That particular exhale, Nadine meeting a situation that would not bend. We were 30 feet out when she pushed back from the kiosk to find a person she could bring the problem to. We were 25 feet away when her gaze swept the terminal in a wide arc and stopped. Stopped on me. The instant her eyes locked onto mine, something moved through her face that I had never seen there before. Not across 25 years of mornings and arguments and silences and the 1,000 unremarkable Tuesday evenings that formed the grain of a long marriage. It was not the managed surprise of someone caught mid-act in something they shouldn't be doing. It was something rawer than that. More instinctive, the look of someone whose internal math has just collapsed, who has run every scenario and built in every contingency, and is now confronting a factor they were certain they'd eliminated. She had not planned on finding me here. Kevin's house, Carolyn's office, the bank's hold music, that was where she had placed me in her thinking. Doing what a man who'd uncovered what I uncovered would do, working the phones, moving paperwork, staying well behind the process. What she had pictured was the machinery of the legal system churning quietly somewhere out of sight, while she walked through a departure terminal looking exactly as she always looked when she was going somewhere important, composed, prepared, already living in whatever came next. She had not built this into any version of the plan. For 3 full seconds, neither of us moved. Life in the terminal flowed right through the stillness, bags, rolling announcements cycling overhead, a child somewhere behind me asking her father if there was time to grab a pretzel before the gate. The intercom called final boarding for Charlotte, and the words reached me without registering because all of my attention had narrowed to the woman standing 40 feet away, doing something I had observed her do across a quarter century of living together. The chin lifted. The shoulders went back. Her hand closed around the suitcase handle. Even here, even at the precise moment the floor had dropped from under her, Nadine pulled herself together. That capacity had always been real in her. Whatever else turned out to be constructed, the composure was genuine. She was not a woman who retreated from the thing that had hit her. She walked directly at it. Standing there knowing what I knew, I still found something in that worth acknowledging. She came toward me. Steady heels, measured stride, the suitcase tracking behind her, the navy blazer doing exactly the work it had been put on to do. She crossed the morning crowd like someone who had already decided the terms of what was about to happen, regardless of what it turned out to be. Next to me, Cody's weight shifted, a barely perceptible straightening, the adjustment of a person who has held themselves ready for a long time and has just felt the moment change. Tamara's hand came to my elbow for one quiet second, and then withdrew, a complete statement made through a single point of contact. My feet stayed where they were. I watched Nadine close the gap. The composure worked, and I watched it work. Jaw firm beneath the even expression, eyes cutting back and forth between my face and Cody's, measuring, calculating, trying to determine what we had and how little room she still had to operate. She pulled up 4 feet away. At that distance, the composure cost something visible. I could read the price in the tension at the edges of her mouth, in the deliberate stillness of her hands, in the controlled quality of a steadiness that I had once simply taken as her character. She looked at me. I looked back. At the face that had been the first thing I saw on 9,000 mornings. At the woman who had stood beside me at a judge's desk on a Tuesday in October and said yes to something she had apparently been quietly revising ever since. At the person who had surveyed the life I had spent 35 years constructing and seen not a home we had built together, but a pool of assets available for transfer. 2 people standing 4 feet apart on a polished airport floor at the end of something that had once been very long. "Walter," she said, and the steadiness in her voice was, I had to admit, impressive. "I think we need to talk." I took one more moment to look at her, the navy blazer, the Louis Vuitton bag upright at her side, the weight of 25 years, and Cody at my left shoulder carrying everything he'd built and everything he'd absorbed on my behalf. "Yes," I said. I gave the word the space it deserved. "We do." Her eyes went to Cody, then came back to me. "Why is he here?" Aimed at me, but she was watching Cody, recalibrating in real time, recognizing that his presence was not incidental. "He's family," I said. "He's here because I asked him to be." Something shifted in her face when I said that. Not guilt. Guilt had never had much purchase with Nadine. She was too practical for it. It was more like the expression on a contractor's face when they realize the inspector is going to go through every room. "Walter." Her weight moved, a reset, a search for a different angle. "Whatever you think is going on, there are things you don't understand. If you'd just give me 10 minutes to explain—" "There's nothing to explain," I said. "But there is something to show you." I looked to Cody. He moved to the check-in counter, set his tablet down, and turned the screen toward Nadine with the deliberate calm of someone who has walked through this moment many times in his head and concluded that restraint lands harder than spectacle. Split screen. Left side camera footage from the ficus timestamp, 12:15 in the morning. Nadine and Brennan coming through the apartment door together. Right side, a column of financial transactions, dates and amounts and account numbers picked out in yellow. The way Cody organized everything, clean, precise, no room for dispute. Nadine studied the screen. 3 full seconds without moving. Her expression held. She was absorbing it the way people who are very controlled absorb things, processing entirely on the inside, nothing leaking into the room. Then her eyes came up to mine. "That is private property," she said. "Whatever you recorded in that apartment, you had no right." "I had every right," I said. "Sati, it is my apartment. My name is on the deed." Under Indiana law, the property owner may record within their own residence without the knowledge or consent of other parties present, provided the owner is one party to any communication being recorded. I was the owner. I consented. The recording is entirely legal. That paragraph had not been planned. It had simply arrived clean and complete, because I had heard Cody walk me through it 4 times over the past week, until it had settled the way sound information settles when you've had enough time with it. Nadine's jaw tightened. "This is ridiculous. You are not a lawyer, Walter." "No," I said, "but I have one." Carolyn Radel filed a temporary protective order covering all joint marital assets with the Marion County Domestic Relations Court 6 days ago. It was granted within 18 hours and served to you by a process server last Thursday morning. The order is on record. The condo is protected. The accounts are frozen. The property transfer document you drafted, the one you labeled research grant application and attempted to get me to sign without telling me what it was, has been submitted to the Indianapolis Division of Police Financial Crimes Unit as evidence of attempted fraud. Every sentence set itself down between us like weight being placed on a scale. Nadine's composure was doing remarkable work by that point. I could see the labor of it in the line of her shoulders, in the metered evenness of each breath, in the way her hands remained at her sides when they must have wanted to do something else. She was a capable woman. That had never been the question. She had simply chosen to point all of that capability somewhere I had trusted too much to look. "You want to make a scene," she said, voice dropped. "Right here in the middle of all these people." Around the check-in area, a handful of travelers had bled off their speed carry-ons, coasting to a stop the way people slow when they can sense that something actual is taking place nearby. "This is humiliating, Walter." "Nadine," I said, keeping my voice low, not from uncertainty, but because the moment had no need of volume. "I'm not here to humiliate you. I'm telling you what has already been done, so you know exactly where things stand." Cody reached into his navy blue backpack and drew out a manila envelope. He placed it on the counter next to the tablet. "This is a copy of the financial documentation, the property transfer draft, the key fob entry logs, and the cloud recording confirmation," he said, speaking to Nadine directly for the first time. No anger in it, no performance. Just a 19-year-old man delivering facts to a woman who had attempted to steal from his grandfather. "The originals are held by Carolyn Radel's office and the police department. This set is yours, so that you and your attorney can start working through where things stand." Nadine looked at the envelope. Then she looked at Cody with an expression I had never once seen cross her face before, something that was neither rage nor fear, but held elements of both the particular volatile mixture of a person who has built their entire position on being the sharpest mind in the room and has just found out they were not. "You did this," she said to Cody. The controlled register in her voice was gone. The edges had started to fray. "You are a child. You had no right to insert yourself into—" "He had every right," I said. My voice came out with an edge I didn't soften. "He is my family. He was looking out for me. That is what family does." Nadine turned back to me. The chin was still up, but the composure was coming apart now, the performance peeling away to expose something underneath that was not performed at all. Her eyes had a brightness that could have been tears or fury or both at once. 25 years, Walter." Her voice had a new quality in it. "You are going to throw away 25 years over a boy with a laptop and a grudge." "I'm not throwing away 25 years, I said. "I'm acknowledging that they're over. The only real question is when they ended. And I suspect we both know the answer to that isn't recent." She opened her mouth. Nothing came. She closed it. Behind her, 2 figures in uniform were making their way through the check-in area with the unhurried, deliberate movement of law enforcement that has already identified its objective. One was an Indianapolis police officer in standard uniform. The other was a plainclothes detective I recognized from the photograph Detective Spear had forwarded to my phone the day before, as a professional courtesy so I'd know who to look for. Nadine registered the shift in my attention before she turned. When she did turn, and then turned back, whatever had remained of her composure had left. Her face was open in a way I had never seen it, unguarded, stripped of the careful management, showing something underneath that looked very much like a woman arriving at the full understanding of what she had set in motion and what it was now going to cost her. "Walter," she said. Her voice had dropped to just above a whisper. "Please." I held her gaze. At the face that had smiled at me 10,000 times, though not all of those smiles had meant what I thought they meant. And what I felt in that moment was not satisfaction. It wasn't grief, and it wasn't anger either. It was something quieter than all of those. More final. The feeling of a door easing shut gently, but all the way. "Take care of yourself, Nadine," I said. I picked up my bag. Cody was already at my side. Tamara moved up at my other shoulder, carry-on rolling steadily, her expression settled and certain. The detective reached Nadine as we turned away. I didn't look back. The security line at Indianapolis International moved the way those lines always do, slowly, then all at once, then slowly again. Shoes in the gray bin. Belt watch phone. You stood with the other Monday morning travelers and let the machine decide you weren't a threat. And the whole time, the world continued at precisely the pace it had always maintained, entirely indifferent to what had just taken place 40 feet behind you at a check-in counter. I found that grounding. The TSA officer who reviewed my boarding pass and passport was a heavy-set man in his 50s, reading glasses on a chain, the practiced efficiency of someone who had processed 10,000 faces and trained himself to assess without quite seeing. He looked at my passport, photo, looked at my face, returned the documents. "Have a good flight, sir," he said. "Thank you," I said. "I intend to." And I meant it. Cody came through directly behind me, backpack in the bin shoes, off moving through the process, with the ease of someone who travels light and plans ahead. Tamara was behind him, organized as always, her carry-on already unzipped to the laptop pocket. I waited for them on the far side of the scanner, gathering my shoes and belt, and watched the small ritual of reassembling yourself that airports always demanded. Kevin came through a moment later, shaking his head at the bin situation, the way he always did, conducting his private, ongoing disagreement with the concept of removing shoes in public, an argument he never quite won. "On gate B12, Cody said, checking his phone. 40 minutes to boarding." We moved through the concourse together. I had walked this particular stretch many times, business trips, the occasional vacation drop-offs and pickups. It was familiar territory, the low hum of the ventilation, the moving walkways, that coffee smell that existed only inside airports and nowhere else on Earth. I had always covered it with a narrowed focus destination already running in my head. This morning was different. I noticed the light coming in through the high windows at the far end of the B concourse, the way it stretched across the polished floor in long, pale strips. A young couple near gate B7 heads together over a shared phone, laughing at something just between them. An older man, traveling solo carry-on tucked between his feet, a paperback open across his knee, reading with the settled ease of someone who had long since made his peace with his own company. I thought that will be me one day. The thought didn't carry the weight it would have carried a week ago. At gate B12, we found 4 seats together by the window. On the tarmac below, ground crews moved around a wide-body aircraft in the early light, the familiar choreography of a plane being made ready. Cody plugged his phone into a charging station. Tamara produced the wax paper sandwiches from her carry-on and handed them around without polling the group on whether anyone was hungry. which was the correct call, because none of us would have said yes, and all of us needed to eat. I sat with the sandwich in my hands and looked out at the tarmac and let the morning settle. My phone buzzed. A text from Carolyn Rydell Nadine was taken in for formal questioning this morning at the airport. Brennan Ashford received a voluntary interview request from the Financial Crimes Unit and has retained an attorney. Process is moving. You don't need to do anything today except get on your flight. I'll be in touch. I read it twice, then held the phone out for Cody. He read it, gave a single nod, and turned back to the window. It's done, he said. The beginning of done, I said. There's still a lot of process ahead. There is, he agreed. But the part where she could still take something from you, that part is done. I sat with that distinction for a moment. The legal road ahead was long divorce proceedings, the fraud investigation, the financial accounting of what had been moved and what might be recovered. None of it was close to finished. None of it would be for a long while. But Cody was right about the specific thing he was pointing at. The part where Nadine could act against me without my awareness, where she could shift money, draft documents, pass a key to someone while I was driving out to job sites in Lafayette, and trusting that the foundation at home was sound, that part was over. The moment the accounts froze, the protective order landed, and the police case opened, that window closed. She had no moves left that I hadn't already seen and addressed. I was no longer the man who didn't know. I took a bite of the sandwich, roast beef and cheddar on sourdough tamara with the mustard to mayo ratio. Exactly right, the way it only gets right when someone has been making the same sandwich for years because they know it's what the people they love prefer. Kevin was reading something on his phone. Tamara was watching the tarmac. Cody had his headphones around his neck, but wasn't using them, eyes half closed in the posture of someone finally allowing themselves to rest. I looked at my family in the Gate B12 waiting area of Indianapolis International Airport on a Monday morning in early June and felt something move through my chest that I hadn't felt in long enough that it took me a beat to name it. I had spent 25 years with a woman who treated my trust as something to be extracted. These people treated it as something to be protected. That was the whole difference. That had always been the whole difference. I had simply been facing the wrong direction to see it. The gate agent's voice came over the speaker, pre-boarding for passengers needing additional time. Cody opened his eyes. Almost time. Almost time. I agreed. I took out my boarding pass and held it. Walter Harold Greer, seat 24. Indianapolis to Newark to Istanbul. A trip that had been planned as an escape from something and had become something else entirely. I thought about Nadine for a moment, not with anger and not quite with grief, more like the feeling you carried when you finally stepped back from a building you'd poured years into and accepted it couldn't be saved. The structural damage too deep, too widespread, too long, left unaddressed. Sometimes the responsible thing, the only responsible thing, was to document what was there, secure the perimeter, and walk away. I had documented the damage. I had secured the site. Now I was walking away. Below the window, a ground crew member signaled toward the aircraft, and the jet bridge began its slow extension toward the forward door, closing the gap between terminal and plane with the unhurried mechanical certainty of something designed to do exactly one thing. I watched it reach the door and lock. Grandpa. Cody was on his feet, backpack settled on his shoulders, boarding pass out, watching me with an expression that held the whole weight of the past week and something lighter underneath it. I stood. I picked up my bag. Let's go, I said. The leg from Newark to Istanbul was 11 hours. I slept through 4 of them, more than I'd managed in any single stretch over the past 2 weeks. Somewhere above the Atlantic, I came awake, the cabin dim and quiet, Cody asleep next to me, with his head tilted back, and his mouth slightly open, the same way he had slept as a small boy when Kevin used to bring him around on Sunday afternoons, and he'd go out cold on my living room floor with his shoes still on. I sat in the dark of the plane and listened to the engines, and felt that particular suspension that comes from being between places no longer there, not yet arrived anywhere. I let myself think about Nadine. For days I had been managing that thought the way you manage a structural assessment, methodically in controlled portions, never letting the full weight of it settle at once. But in the dark of the aircraft over the Atlantic, with Cody sleeping beside me and Kevin and Tamara somewhere in the rows behind, I let it come. 25 years. I had loved her. I wanted to be honest about that, at least to myself in the dark, where no one else was listening. Whatever she had grown into, whatever had been running beneath the careful surface of the life we shared, I had loved her. The woman at the company picnic in the white sundress. The woman who had stood with me in a judge's office on a Tuesday afternoon in October because we'd wanted no fuss, just the fact of it, just the official start. The woman who had laughed on a hiking trail in the Smoky Mountains with the sun across her face. I didn't know at what point she had stopped being that woman, or whether that woman had ever been fully real. My best guess was somewhere between that she had been real at the start and had shifted by increments so small that neither of us had named the turning point. Or perhaps I had registered it and chosen to look past it, the way you sometimes drove by a building you knew was in trouble, and told yourself the cracks were just settling. Nothing structural, because the other conclusion required action you weren't ready to take. I had spent my life in construction. I knew better than most that deferred maintenance always ran a higher bill than early intervention. But you couldn't go back and rebuild from an earlier foundation. You could only assess what you were looking at, record the condition, and make the best decision for what remained. What remained was considerable. The deed to the condo secure in my briefcase in the overhead bin. The retirement accounts reduced but recoverable according to Carolyn. The navy jacket folded in my checked bag on its way to Istanbul. The photograph of Kevin at his college graduation. Cody's navy blue backpack in the bin alongside my briefcase, packed with whatever a 19-year-old stuffs into a bag when he's flying to Turkey on a week's notice because his grandfather needed him. What remained was the things that had always mattered, and the ability to see them without obstruction. I closed my eyes. When they opened again, the cabin lights were lifting and the flight attendants were moving through the aisles. Through the window, the sky had shifted from black to a deep, luminous blue, and somewhere below, still out of sight, but drawing closer, was Turkey. We came down at Istanbul Airport in the middle of the morning, local time, the city already wide awake beneath a sky of remarkable clarity. That particular shade of blue that makes you understand why people have been painting the sky for 3,000 years. I walked off the jet bridge into the terminal and felt the air shift warmer, denser somehow, carrying something I couldn't find a name for. The accumulated presence of a place that had been continuously inhabited long before anyone I knew had drawn a first breath. Cody materialized at my shoulder backpack on eyes moving with the sharp alertness of someone who had slept on a plane and come down in an entirely different world. "Look at that light," he said. I looked. The terminal windows faced east, and the morning sun was cutting through them at an angle that gilded everything, the floors, the moving walkways, the faces of travelers passing in every direction. The kind of light that makes unremarkable things look like they mean something. "Yeah," I said. The hotel sat on the European side of the city, a 20-minute taxi ride from the airport, along roads that seemed organized by principles I wasn't familiar with. Narrow lanes that opened without warning into wide boulevards. Ancient stone walls standing directly beside modern apartment buildings. minarets rising up from clusters of red-roofed houses. I sat in the back seat and watched it all move past, and felt something open up in my chest that I can only describe as the sensation of being reminded that the world is genuinely large and has been carrying on for a very long time, and will keep carrying on regardless of what took place at a check-in counter in Indianapolis, Indiana. That wasn't diminishing. It was a relief. The hotel room had a balcony. Cody established this within roughly 4 seconds of the bellman's departure and pushed both doors open with the energy of someone who had never had a balcony to speak of and meant to get full use of this one. The Bosphorus spread out below that storied strait running between the Black Sea and the Marmara. The water was a deep, restless blue-green that shifted as clouds crossed the sun. Across the water, the Asian side of the city rose from the shoreline in layered tiers of rooftops and trees. Ferries moved in both directions, white and unhurried, trailing fine lines of wake behind them. I stepped out beside Cody. He was holding the railing with both hands, leaning slightly into the view, taking it in with his whole body, the way people do when they're standing in front of something genuinely new to them. I stood next to him and looked out at the water, the city, the sky. For a long stretch, neither of us said anything because the view made conversation feel like interference. We were both people who understood that some silences were better left alone. Then Cody said, "How are you doing, actually?" I gave the question the honest consideration it warranted. "I am 60 years old," I said. "I have a paid-off condo in Indianapolis, Indiana that is mine outright. I have a grandson who spent 3 weeks looking out for me before I even understood I needed looking after. I have a son who bought a plane ticket to Istanbul without once asking whether I was comfortable with it, which is exactly what I would have done in his position." I paused. "I have a fraud case moving through the Indianapolis legal system, and a divorce that will take the better part of a year to finalize, and a retirement account that needs rebuilding." I looked out at the Bosphorus. "And I am standing on a balcony in Istanbul, watching ferries cross a strait that has been here for 10,000 years. Cody looked over at me. "That sounds like a lot," he said. "It is a lot," I said. "But it's the right kind of a lot. It is moving in the right direction." He gave a slow nod, the nod of a thoughtful person who has asked an honest question and received one in return. Behind us, the hotel room door swung open, and Kevin came through with coffee in hand. Tamara beside him, both of them having found the room service menu with the efficiency of people who had been traveling together for 15 years and required no discussion to get there. Kevin handed me a cup, without asking the same gesture Tamara had made in the Carmel kitchen a week ago. A dialect spoken inside a family, one I had been immersed in my entire life without ever stopping to recognize how fluently I understood it. Both hands curled around the cup, and I turned my eyes back toward the water. Carolyn Riedel had sent word while Cody and I were still in the cab. Nadine's sit-down with the Financial Crimes Unit had happened Monday morning. She walked in with legal representation beside her. That attorney had, in Carolyn's measured words, counseled her to cooperate. Brennan Ashford's own voluntary interview was set for Wednesday. The fraud investigation was moving along exactly as the timeline required. The divorce paperwork would land at the Marion County Domestic Relations Court before the week was out. The whole apparatus of accountability ground forward, methodical, undramatic, the way it always does when the paper trail is airtight and the facts don't shift. 35 years of building things had taught me one consistent truth. The structures that last are the ones whose footings are honest. A bad foundation can be masked, packed with compound, painted over, finished to a shine that fools anyone who hasn't learned what to look for underneath. But stress finds the flaw. Every time without exception, it finds it. Nadine had raised her life on ground that wasn't solid, and the weight had come due. Whatever followed wasn't punishment I'd handed her. It was physics, a structure she herself assembled now, answering to a load it was never built to hold. My only part had been refusing to keep my eyes shut. Cody slid his arm across my shoulders. There was nothing tentative in it, none of the hesitation you might expect from a young man unsure of his footing. It was the unthinking, confident reach of someone certain of his place, who had simply concluded that being close was what the moment called for. "So," he said, "what do you want to do today?" I took in the ferries threading across the Bosphorus, the minarets lit gold in the early light, the old city conducting its ancient rhythms on either bank of a strait that had been doing this for millennia. I let myself think about 35 years of dawn starts and construction sites and the particular honest satisfaction that comes from work done straight. I thought about a white sundress at a company picnic, a payoff letter left flat on a kitchen table, a deep navy blazer over dark, tailored slacks folded inside a bag in a hotel room in Istanbul. I thought about Cody at 19 acting on instinct in a parking deck, because it mattered to him, genuinely mattered, whether his grandfather was okay. And I thought about the arithmetic of my years, how much of them I had poured into building things for everyone else, and how rarely I had let myself just stand somewhere beautiful and take it in. "But nothing yet," I said. "I need to stand here a little longer." Cody gave a slow nod and kept his arm where it was. The Bosphorus did what the Bosphorus does, moved without stopping, without caring, carrying its ferries and its reflected light and 10,000 years of crossings between two continents. I stood on that balcony with my coffee and my grandson, and I let the moment be nothing more and nothing less than what it was. It had been longer than I could honestly say, since that had felt like enough. Here is what I know now: trust itself is not the weakness. Trust that operates blind, that never questions, never checks, that is the unlocked door. 25 years I spent constructing a life, and I came close to losing it because I mistook familiarity for security. I gave someone the complete blueprint of everything I had built, and it never crossed my mind to ask whether we were reading that drawing the same way. That was the failure, not the loving, the not seeing. The love itself was genuine. The blindness is what cost me. If something in this story of family betrayal has struck a nerve, I am asking you to hear this. Don't hold out the way I held out. Don't explain away those low, nagging doubts the way I did. Betrayal inside a family doesn't come through the front door announcing itself. It creeps in through small favors and easy grins, through behaviors you rationalize, because the truth of them is more than you want to sit with. I have no powerful network, no Manhattan address. I am a 60-year-old engineer out of Indianapolis who was saved by grace, specifically by a 19-year-old who cared enough about me to keep his eyes open. God put that boy in my life. I carry that with full knowledge of what it means. This story of family betrayal stripped years from me. It also gave me an education that no professional achievement ever matched. And that final devastating act of family betrayal turned out to be the door to something more solid and more honest than anything I had ever managed to construct before. That is where this story lands. Not in a courtroom, not in a shouting match at a front door, but on a balcony in Istanbul, a cup of coffee going cold in my hands, a 19-year-old boy's arm across my shoulders. This cost me years I cannot get back. It cost me the version of my marriage I had believed in for a very long time. But I believe God placed Cody in my life for exactly this reason, not to spare me from the pain, but to make sure I did not go through it blind and alone. What this grandpa story taught me in the end was not about betrayal. It was about what remains when everything false has been stripped away. This family revenge story didn't harden me. It freed me. If you take anything from what Walter went through, let it be this. Pay attention to the small things that don't add up. Silence and patience are not the same as weakness, they are how you build an airtight case. Never sign anything you haven't read yourself, no matter how much you trust the person handing you the pen. And remember, the people who love you will show it in steady, unremarkable ways, day after day, without needing anything in return. If this grandpa story or any part of this family revenge story moved, you leave a thought in the comments. I read them. If you know someone carrying something heavy right now, pass this along. And if you haven't yet, follow Calm Family Revenge so the next story finds you. Thank you for being here today. Take good care of yourself.